Hey, this is EDL 854 case study, The Budget Debacle by Amber Moore. So first let's look at the case study summary. The problem presented is that Mr. Barley is a new parent president of the School Fundraising Foundation, and in the spirit of competition, he's decided that the best way to raise money for the school is to hold a raffle for cash. However, just as the raffle for cash is to be drawn, the sheriff arrives at the school and escorts Mr. Barley to the station. Upon his arrival at the station, he is charged with a misdemeanor, and ultimately, Briardale Elementary is shamed. Briardale Elementary specifically serves about 600 students K-5, and it is one of 6 elementary schools in the district. Some important people to look at in this case study would be Mr. Santos. He is the Briardale Elementary principal, and he has a history of just being very confident in his ability to manage school finances. He is also the one who oversaw, as Mr. Barley was nominated for his position as president, and provided him with some policies and procedures in regards to his role as president of the foundation. Mr. Barley is a Harvard graduate and a new parent president of the school foundation. He's friends with Mr. Morley, and he's very competitive. Mr. Morley is also a parent president of a foundation in another school, and him and Mr. Barley were Harvard alumni, and specifically, Mr. Morley beat Mr. Barley for class president in college, and so there's a little bit of competition between the two of them, which kind of spurred Mr. Barley to make the decisions that he did to try to raise as much money for the foundation and ultimately for the students as possible. Some important groups that we need to consider in this case study is the school curriculum committee. This is headed by a lead teacher in the school, and they work with the foundation to determine how funds will be spent. And typically what they do is they spend their funds to support student extra activities, music, art, band, those kinds of things. Then we have the Briardale Foundation, which is headed by a parent, is who's ultimately voted in, and that happens to be Mr. Barley. And they plan and raise all of the additional funds for the elementary schools. So all of the fundraising activities that they do, everything is planned within the foundation, and then they work with the school curriculum committee to decide how those funds are going to be spent. So really, here's the dilemma. Booster clubs are typically separate legal entities for which schools are reluctant to assume liability. But schools inadvertently take on liability when they implement a policy such as requiring the school principal to review and approve the booster club budget. And since Mr. Santos plays such a significant role in working with the budget and the foundation, he now has assumed that liability. And then suggests that the school has no liability for the budget, it just reviewed and approved. So this is really kind of an ethical and legal dilemma that schools get into when they are working with the parent booster clubs or fundraising committees. Some legal and ethical concerns that arose in this case study is, I think the first one to really look at is negligence, and was Mr. Barley and Mr. Santos and the foundation themselves negligent in their actions when choosing to do a raffle for cash? What were the state laws in regards to raffles? And some questions to really consider when looking at this case is, what was the strategy for selling the raffle tickets? How much was the winner going to win? And what were the procedures for selling and keeping track of funds? Was there checks and balances in place? Those kinds of things. Specifically, looking at the Nebraska statutes was really important for this case. Uh, in the state of Nebraska, it is legal to do a raffle and a raffle for cash. However, certain guidelines have to be followed. Specifically, in our state, if you are going to raise anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 or more, you have to actually apply for a lottery license through the state of Nebraska. And then all proceeds have to be reported. The proceeds raised that the schools are going to keep, and the winner of those proceeds all have to be reported to the Nebraska Lottery. Um, and that is actually determined by the Nebraska Department of Revenue. So if these policies and procedures are not followed in the state of Nebraska, then it technically is illegal to hold any raffles in general, especially raffles for money. So what went wrong here in this particular case study? A few things actually went wrong. Is state laws were clearly violated. All parties were negligent. Prior to the actual event, Mr. Barley had presented his fundraising idea to both the foundation and to Mr. Santos. And all parties agreed. And the reality is there was no checks and balances in place when reviewing these policies and as the money was being collected. So ultimately, what was it? Was Mr. Santos charged with theft? Was it because of negligence? Or was there malicious intent when he raised the money? Kind of when putting this all together, I think it's important to remember a few things. Mr. Barley approved the fundraiser idea with the foundation committee, so it wasn't just a one-man show. All stakeholders were aware of the fundraising event and approved. And when I say stakeholders, I mean Mr. Santos had approved, other parents had approved. Um, and then, was it possible that the tipster knew that Mr. Barley was stealing or was breaking a state fundraising law? So it's very possible that that's what the tipster knew, and that's why they had called the sheriff's department. Um, and at the end of the day, since Mr. Barley was charged with a misdemeanor, the foundation really needs to review all the policies and procedures to ensure that this does not happen again in the future. So when we think about moving forward, at this point, the school has been shamed. Mr. Barley has been charged with a misdemeanor offense. What the school really needs to do, because they do play a role in the foundation finances, an internal investigation will need to be completed. And really what that's about is to determine whether or not Mr. Barley broke what laws he actually broke, and was it negligence or intentional. The second thing that needs to be done is the foundation, in partnership with the school administration, they need to work to develop a new policy and procedural handbook that future foundation members and presidents can refer back to make sure that no laws are broken in the future. Mr. Santos also needs to make a public announcement to all stakeholders after all of these things are complete. And the reason for that is because in communities, there is a lot of times when rumors get started and the school has already been shamed, so we don't want that. And the relationship with the foundation needs to be repaired because at the end of the day, the foundation is what provides the additional funding for the schools and for the students for those extra activities. Some of the pros and cons of those decisions, um, really the pros are the district themselves and the foundation will have a better understanding of the reason behind the charges so they can determine whether or not, again, Mr. Barley was negligent in his behavior or if there was any ill intent behind what he was doing, specifically if theft had been a motive. Um, Future incidences will potentially be avoided with that policy handbook. Some cons of this is due to Mr. Barley's history in the community, he's very respected as an individual, and there could potentially be some backlash once the investigation begins. And the foundation ultimately may lose some credibility, thus causing the school to lose their additional funding. So it's really important that throughout this process, that relationships are repaired and stakeholders are consistently informed, simply because the event itself was such a public event. So, in summary, kind of looking at all of the things that happened during this particular case, is laws were ultimately broken. If they hadn't been, then Mr. Barley would not have been actually charged with a crime, even though it was a misdemeanor offense. Relationships right now are also strained. Relationships between the school and the foundation and the community. And so it's really, really important that those relationships are repaired. As of right now, the school and the foundation for Briarwood is the public image has been tarnished, and so it's really important to do some things and some publicity things to really help reinforce the positive image that the school has worked so hard for. And ultimately, if all of these things are not taken into consideration and these steps aren't followed, there is a potential loss of funding for the school. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the ones that will suffer are the students because that's where the funding always went. So it's really important that we take into all of these considerations and remember at the end of the day that the foundation was developed to support students in all of their extracurricular activities within the school building. Thanks.